Hello from Glasgow. For the first time in a while, it is nice and bright outside, which is lovely and helps with the lighting for this video. Today I'm going to explain responsible scaling policies. Have you ever wondered how AI labs that build all these sophisticated and quite scary AI models actually govern and manage the models they build to ensure that they don't destroy humanity? Yes, I have. You're in luck, because I'm going to explain what responsible scaling policies are. Now, responsible scaling policies is quite a mouthful, so I'm just going to shorten this to RSPs. About a year ago, Anthropic released their RSPs, and it was a fairly big moment. It detailed their policies and practices they would put into place as they were building newer models with their lab. It was important because it started this chain in the world of governing AI where you had lots of other labs decide to take on a similar kind of model where they would actually think about having some risk framework to actually put some guardrails in place for the models they build. So there's a core kernel, a problem that the RSP is trying to mitigate against, which is as you build more sophisticated AI models, the more likely it is that these models can be dangerous. Lots of AI models that we build now, they're cool. They can do lots of amazing things, things that kind of blow our minds, but when put in the wrong hands, they can do dangerous things, and we want to try and stop those from happening. And an RSP is trying to do that. It is trying to get AI labs to figure out how dangerous is the model that I'm building and try and put guardrails in place to mitigate against those. So the way Anthropic does this is through AI safety levels. They have different tiers for where the model can rank on dangerousness, and then they have specific precautionary measures they put into place. This is inspired heavily by biosafety levels. So if Anthropic determines that one of the models that they build is an AI safety level 3, they will say, okay, we have this model seems dangerous, what should we do to now stop this from going complete bananas? And one way they might do that is by saying, okay, the source code for this model, we're going to limit it. We're going to make sure that not everyone on the team can access it, and we can ensure that it doesn't somehow suddenly get leaked to everybody in the world. Responsible scaling policy is kind of a big deal. The UK government and the AI Safety Institute have a responsible capability scaling, which is the same thing under a different name, and I'm not quite sure why they chose to use a different name. Anywho, that has a bunch of recommendations around what labs should do if they're building dangerous models. Now, responsible scaling policies can only work if you have evaluations. Evaluations help figure out whether a model is actually dangerous or not. You have a way of testing the model against different situations and figuring out, okay, this model seems to be doing quite badly in this situation in a way that could actually be quite catastrophic, so we should try and prevent that from happening. Some of these evaluations can be really simple, so if you want to test if a model is really good at figuring out biology stuff, just give it a bunch of questions on biology and see how it scores. Turns out it does pretty well most of the time, or at least to the standard of a PhD student who has spent lots of their life looking at biology and texts in biology. This maybe gives you some intuition around its dangerous capabilities. Maybe it can manufacture things that you don't want it to manufacture using math, science, and other means at its disposal. My camera is no longer cooperating with me, so I will continue my point via my phone. Now, maybe you don't want a model to simply interact on a bunch of questions and figure out whether it's dangerous via that. Perhaps you want it to interact with other human beings. You want it to actually do things in the real world and see whether it does things that you don't think are good. And this is exactly what Meteor did, the Model Evaluation Threat Research Lab. GPT-4 went on TaskRabbit, hired someone to help solve a CAPTCHA for it, and when the person who was hired to solve the CAPTCHA asked whether the GPT-4 was a robot, GPT-4 decided to lie and say it had a visual impairment. These evaluations are really crucial to making responsible scaling policies work. If you have good evaluations, you can have good RSPs. The two are really tied in. There is a problem with RSPs, of course, and it isn't all great. And that's kind of the problem with a lot of these new governance techniques. Most of them aren't going to be great, unfortunately. Whilst there's a lot of expertise and smart people doing this, it's still going to take time before it becomes actually robust. And of course, the biggest problem with RSPs is that they're voluntary. Labs decide whether they want to have an RSP, and they will have to decide whether they will follow through on their commitments. And as we've recently seen, AI labs aren't particularly great at following through on commitments. And the second problem is that evaluations, the thing that kind of forms one of the backbones of RSPs, aren't always great. Researchers are kind of struggling to figure out what evals end up being useful to test whether a model is dangerous, whether their evaluations actually work to determine whether a system is dangerous or not. So the two problems: responsible scaling policies are voluntary, and evaluations aren't always great. But again, this is new, and new things are never great, and it takes time to perfect and make sure that we can actually get this right. And I think it's important that if you're at the point in this video where you are keenly interested in this, to maybe try and make this work. Meter are hiring for a bunch of new roles, which means that you could be one of those people trying to figure out how to evaluate AI models. Maybe you're a policy nut. Maybe you've spent time in legislation before, lobbying. Maybe you've worked in think tanks. You'll still be important as well, because responsible scaling policies are going to translate into real codified legislation at some point, I reckon. There's probably going to be AI safety levels that are followed throughout the world globally. Responsible scaling policies are just the first step. It's the first step to figuring out how do you manage the risks associated with AI. They have problems, lots of problems I haven't talked about. There's lots of problems I will link in the description of this video. Lots of people aren't really happy with the way RSPs are made. There's a whole discussion about this, a lot I can't get into in what would be a 5 to 6 minute video. But I want you to kind of explore further. Meter have a task bounty up at the moment that allows you to send them tasks that an AI can try and do, and maybe it can help figure out whether an AI system's dangerous or not. Maybe you have a very critical lens on all of this stuff, and I think that's really useful too. Lots of the responsible scaling policies that are put into place, they get different names. So for OpenAI, it's called Preparedness Framework. For different labs, they'll have different names. But you know, these things are just the first versions of it all. And maybe you just disagree with what should be a good precautionary measure for a certain dangerousness. This is a useful conversation to have, and I think we don't have enough of it. We have a very small community of people thinking about this, and I think that isn't great. I'll leave links. There's a bunch of stuff that you could do to try and make progress on this stuff. And yeah, I hope this was somewhat helpful. I'm hoping to keep up videos like this. This is my first attempt at trying to do explainable governance AI stuff to the regular world, because the regular world usually doesn't get a chance to actually understand some of this stuff. So hopefully this is helpful, and I hope to bring you more stuff eventually. Yeah, I don't quite know how to end this video. Maybe I'll just look out in the sky, and that will be the way this ends. And I'll then have some music maybe that shows up, that then like also has a list of things you can possibly do. And generally I feel more comfortable kind of improvising this stuff, but what's interesting about YouTube is you have kind of a script, or you have like things you need to say,